and Public Lands will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on 4 public land recreation bills. Under Committee Rule 4, subparagraph F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member or their designees. This will allow us to hear from our witnesses sooner and help members keep to their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today or at the close of the hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the notice,
this meeting is being recorded.
Documents or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that, as with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. As with our in-person meetings, members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. Good morning to all of my colleagues. I want to thank you all for attending this subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands legislative hearing on 4 bills to improve access to recreational opportunities on our national forests and public lands. I also want to take a moment to thank the Biden administration and outside witnesses who are joining us today virtually to share their perspectives on these very important bills. Before I address these bills, I'd like to take a moment of personal privilege, I suppose, to talk just about why public lands recreation is so important to me and my constituents in Colorado's 2nd District. In Colorado, the Department of Commerce at the national level estimates that 149,000 jobs in outdoor recreation total roughly $6.4 billion in wages and salaries in our state. The Outdoor Recreation Industry Association estimates that outdoor recreation contributes as much as $28 billion in annual consumer spending in Colorado and $887 billion nationally across the country. In my district, there are an estimated 500 outdoor companies in Boulder and Fort Collins across northern Colorado, and with places like Rocky Mountain National Park, Arapahoe Basin Ski Area, and countless other world-class recreational opportunities right outside our doors, it of course is no surprise that my constituents alone spend roughly $2.5 billion every year on outdoor recreation. Safe to say that outdoor recreation is as much about our economy as it is about our lifestyle and opportunities in the Rocky Mountain West, and that draws so many people to my district and to Colorado. And it's for these reasons that one of the first bills that I introduced in Congress was the CORE Act. I've worked with Chair Grijalva and others to now pass this proposal through the House on numerous occasions, including most recently this year as a title of Representative Getz, Protecting America's Wilderness and Public Lands Act, very important measure. The CORE Act would designate nearly 400,000 acres throughout Colorado for a variety of primarily recreational opportunities. And it's important to remember that congressional designations are one of the best tools that we have to provide for recreation-focused management and to provide sustainable visitation, as well as increase economic activity in the gateway communities where many outdoor businesses are based. While the CORE Act is focused on Colorado's communities, there are further policy changes that we believe can help us improve public lands recreation nationally. Last Congress, I was proud to work with this subcommittee's former chair and now the current Secretary of the Interior, then Representative Deb Hallett, and other bipartisan members of Congress to introduce the Simplifying Outdoor Access for Recreation Act, more commonly known as the SOAR Act. This Congress, we are picking up where that work left off, having reintroduced that same bill, the SOAR Act, as H.R. 3670 to reflect last year's committee reported version with some small technical changes and improvements. As introduced, the SOAR Act would improve public lands, recreation, ultimately in 3 major ways. First, by modernizing recreation permitting, making recreation a priority. Secondly, and then of course third, maintaining recreational assets in partnership with private volunteers and nonprofit organizations, including public land corps. More simply put, the SOAR Act is about making sure outdoor recreation is growing our multi-billion-dollar recreation economy while providing communities with the physical and mental benefits of time outside. And these efforts are especially important as we continue our economic recovery to build back better from this pandemic. In support of those same goals, I'm also pleased to be hearing 3 additional recreation-focused bills today, all of which I'm proud to co-sponsor. Of course, H.R. 3686, the Ski Hill Resources for Economic Development Act, or SHRED Act, as introduced by Representative Annie Custer of New Hampshire, and which I'm proud to co-sponsor, would create the ski fee area retention account. This bill ultimately would help retain and spend a percentage of ski area rental fees to support ski areas and other recreation and wildfire preparedness on our national forests where those fees are collected. As a result of the pandemic, many parks, ski areas, and outfitters were forced to close or limit capacity. However, people continued to flock to our national forests and public lands, increasing visitation, but reducing forest revenues and receipts. Going forward, the SHRED Act will help ensure that our highest visitation forests are equipped with additional resources to support their unique needs and responsible management. As the representative who represents the White River National Forest, one of the most heavily visited forests in the United States, home to incredible ski resorts like Vail, Colorado, Breckenridge, and many others, this bill is, of course, very important to me, and I know to many of my colleagues today. Next, we have H.R. 3687, a very important bill from Representative Tlaib from Michigan, a subcommittee member of the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act. It's a product of this subcommittee's past work on recreation policy. This legislation was first introduced last Congress, again by then Chair Haaland, and this year a similar version has already passed the House as an amendment to H.R. 803. This legislation would provide important tools to the Secretaries of Interior and Agriculture, allowing them to report to Congress and identify additional opportunities to improve access for more diverse user groups, including low-income families and those who may be at high risk of adverse health or environmental effects. Lastly, from our newest subcommittee member, Representative Moore of Utah, we have the bipartisan H.R. 31113, the Modernizing Access to Our Public Land Act, or MAP Land Act. This bill would ensure recreationists have up-to-date digital information about public lands and improve the availability of information about access points, trails, and seasonal restrictions or closures. All of the bills before us today are important bills. They warrant bipartisan, in my view, unanimous support from our subcommittee, and so I certainly look forward to engaging with my colleagues and the diverse coalitions of stakeholders that support these bills as we work to sustain and expand public land recreation and support our local economies. Finally, I want to just address an important note that Representative Ledra Fernandez noted at the outset of this hearing, which is that it's important we take a moment to recognize how climate change is impacting our ability to recreate on public lands. In the past committee meetings, witnesses have testified to more seasonal uncertainty, reduced snowpack, uncharacteristic fish and wildlife migrations, and extreme drought and wildfire, as Representative Ledra Fernandez noted, in New Mexico and Arizona currently, all affecting the ongoing ability of our constituents to hunt, to fish, to recreate, and make a living at outdoor-dependent businesses. The SOAR Act helps to recognize climate change impacts by providing more flexibility, really cutting red tape to permit holders who are increasingly unable to utilize their permitted days or activities due to circumstances beyond their control. And the bill also recognizes shifting seasons and with them changing visitation patterns, considering opportunities to expand seasonal recreation, staffing, and resources. Addressing these climate-driven concerns helps support our small businesses and ensures our land management agencies remain nimble in the face of climate uncertainty. So with that, I want to thank our witnesses again for joining us today and very much appreciate the valuable testimony that you will offer. And I now would like to yield back and recognize Ranking Member Westerman in lieu of Ranking Member Fulcher for his 5-minute opening statement.
Well, thank you, Chairman Neguse. Today we do meet to discuss 4 pieces of legislation related to recreation on federal lands. But before we get started, I would like to also take a moment and recognize the fact that our forests in the West continue to go up in flames. We can wring our hands about climate change. As a matter of fact, the latest data from Hawaii shows that our concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is at an all-time high, around 419 parts per million. But wringing our hands about climate change isn't going to save one of these forests. If we want to reduce the impact of an extreme drought and extreme heat in the West, we're going to have to start managing these forests. We can manage them to be resilient even in the face of a drought. So we can talk about climate change being the cause of it, but the big question is, what are we going to do about it? And right now, we're doing very little about it. We're managing fewer acres than we've managed in the past. There's more acres that are subject to catastrophic wildfire. And hopefully there will be a little bit of management, as you mentioned, that could come from this legislation today. And it is good that we're talking about recreation and access to public lands. Outdoor recreation is vital to our nation's economy. In 2019, the outdoor recreation economy accounted for 2.1%, or $459.8 billion of the U.S. GDP. I have the privilege of representing the 4th Congressional District of Arkansas, where my constituents and visitors to the natural state enjoy a wide array of recreational activities, including camping, boating, canoeing, kayaking, hiking, backpacking, rock climbing, hunting, and fishing, as well as more, including mountain biking. America's federal lands and waters provide incredible opportunities for people to be active outdoors. Unfortunately, for many, outdoor recreational opportunities are not always easily accessible. Having a skilled outfitter or guide who can provide equipment and expert advice can make a huge difference. Additionally, recreating on federal lands often requires special permits and payments of fees that, while important to helping in maintaining our federal lands, too often involve confusing, cumbersome, and costly processes for recreationists and recreation service providers alike. The bills before us today are intended to reduce the cost and complexity of recreating on federal lands and to help recreation service providers continue to operate and build quality recreation facilities on federal lands. First, we will hear testimony today on the SOAR Act that is sponsored by Chairman Neguse. This bill, which started out as a Republican bill called the Guide and Outfitters Act, or GO Act, provides expanded access to outdoor recreation by improving our federal outfitter and guiding permitting systems. New permitted uses of public lands are rarely authorized because permitting processes have become unnecessarily complex and costly in some agencies. The SOAR Act makes common sense changes to permitting processes and regulations to enable more access to federal lands and increased economic benefits. I'd like to thank Representative John Curtis of Utah, who spent a lot of time and effort on this bill and helped get it to the place it is today. He actually ran this bill last Congress with Secretary Haaland. I'm deeply disappointed that this formerly bipartisan bill was introduced without him on board, and I hope that this concerning trend of Democrats introducing bills historically led by Republicans comes to an end immediately. We must not let good policy suffer at the hands of petty partisanship. Second, we will be discussing the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act, sponsored by another committee colleague, Representative Tlaib. This bill seeks to improve visitation and access to federal lands for communities of color, low-income communities, and tribal communities by requiring the Departments of the Interior and Agriculture to complete a report on the use of special recreation permits by recreation service providers serving in environmental justice communities. I am really looking forward to discussing this legislation. Frequently, our friends on the other side pay lip service to reducing barriers and promoting access to federal lands to diverse user groups, while simultaneously supporting new burdens and regulations and overly restrictive federal land designations such as wilderness, which impose strict limitations on the types of authorized recreation, as well as limits on group sizes. I would also like to note that this bill passed as an amendment to H.R. 803 at the start of the 117th Congress, so it seems somewhat backwards to be holding a hearing on a bill that has already passed the House. Next, we will hear testimony on the Ski Hill Resources for Economic Development Act, or the SHRED Act, sponsored by Representative Custer, spurring demand for expanded and updated facilities and amenities. Unfortunately, the Forest Service struggles to keep pace with permitting for needed infrastructure improvements and capital investments at existing resorts. This bill is intended to help the Forest Service keep pace with ski area permitting demand by allowing a portion of the roughly $39 million in annual fees that federal land resorts pay to the Treasury to be retained and used by the Forest Service in support of ski area permit administration. Finally, I would like to highlight the Republican bill we are considering today, the MAP Land Act, sponsored by our Natural Resources Committee colleague, Representative Moore of Utah. This bill would direct federal land management agencies to consolidate, digitize, and make publicly available recreational access information as geospatial files. Currently, many of the easement records that identify legal means of access onto BLM and Forest Service managed lands are stored at the local level on paper files, which make it difficult for hunters, anglers, and even the agencies themselves to identify public access opportunities. I am supportive of the efforts to improve information on what the federal land management agencies own, which is why I've been a lead co-sponsor on complementary legislation, the FLAIR Act, in past Congresses. The MAP-Land Act will help land management agencies prioritize projects to acquire new public land access or improve existing access. This bill will be a game changer for sportsmen and recreational users of our federal lands. I'm looking forward to the witness testimony and would especially like to thank my friend, Mr. Joel Peterson from the Mule Deer Foundation for being here today. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Westerman. I'd also like to acknowledge that full committee chair Grijalva will be joining us today. I don't know if he is on the call currently, but Chairman Grijalva, are you with us? All right. If not, we will proceed, but we'll certainly recognize the chairman when he's able to join for 5 minutes for anything that he would like to add. So with that, I'd like to turn to our first panel and welcome the members of Congress to testify on the bill that sponsored. Let me remind the witnesses that under our committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will start and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining and red when your time is expired. I recommend members and witnesses remotely use stage view or grid view so that they may pin the timer on their screen. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I'd like to start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes, although I don't intend to take the full 5 minutes. But with respect to the SOAR Act, the first bill that's before our committee today, along with my Democratic colleagues, Representative DeGette, Representative Gallego, and Representative Dingell, I'm pleased to reintroduce H.R. 3670, the Simplifying Outdoor Access for Recreation Act, more commonly known as the SOAR Act. The bipartisan and bicameral proposals combined into the SOAR Act have been introduced or reintroduced several times, including by Senator Wyden and Heinrich, and here in the House last Congress by former full committee ranking member Bishop and subcommittee chair Howland. Just as a reminder, because I want to make sure, it sounds like the ranking member might be confused on this point. The SOAR Act was a Deb Haaland bill last Congress. It was introduced by the subcommittee chair at that time, Chairwoman Howland. And these policies have been endorsed and co-sponsored in one form or another by numerous current and former members on both sides of the aisle. We've certainly, made every opportunity to Republican members of the House to join out the bill, and would hope that they would consider doing so. That opportunity has existed since the day we began working on the bill, and it exists to this day. As you know, Ranking Member Westerman, the SOAR Act itself garnered unanimous bipartisan support in the Resources Committee when every member of the committee, including the current ranking member of the full committee, agreed to report the bill by unanimous consent last Congress. We often disagree when it comes to the management of our public lands, but when it comes to recreation, it should be easy to agree that high demand and complex requirements stretch agency resources and create barriers to access. And by addressing those barriers, the SOAR Act improves the system for all users, from commercial outfitters and guides to nonprofits aiming to provide formative outdoor experiences to those from low-income, underserved, or at-risk communities. So again, I would hope, as I mentioned, this bill, when it was introduced just last year in virtually the same form by Representative Deb Haaland, the chairwoman of the subcommittee, it passed on unanimous consent out of the full committee. I would certainly hope that the same would be true this time around, given that the bill has not changed in any significant way. So with
the gentleman yield? Will the gentleman yield?
Sure, I would yield to the ranking member, of course.
Yeah, it's a great bill. It's a bill that is bipartisan. It passed on unanimous consent. And that's why it's unfortunate that Representative Curtis, who has been one of the most agreeable members, tries to work across the aisle more than anyone else. It's unfortunate that for whatever reason, he is not a co-sponsor on the bill this time. And I know that he and Secretary Haaland worked on that bill together, and my understanding was that he was the original author of the bill. So yes, it's good policy. I just wanted to point out that it's unfortunate that it's not a bipartisan bill in the sense that Representative Curtis has not owned the bill during this Congress.
Yeah, thank you, Ranking Member. And I certainly, again, would say we've given every opportunity to Representative Curtis to join the bill as a co-lead. We welcome him to doing that, and any Republican member for that matter. They are welcome to do the exact same thing that they did in the last Congress, which is join this bill as a co-lead. And I certainly would hope that they consider that. So, but I appreciate your statements. The chair now recognizes the gentle lady from Michigan, if she is with us, Ms. Tlaib.
Yes, thank you so much, Chairman Neguse. I am so pleased to be with all of you today. I'm excited to testify on behalf of my bill, the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act. As you all have said, Secretary Holland introduced this bill last term, and I'm thrilled to have such a great partner to help implement it now. You all know public lands belong equally to all of us. Regardless of where we live or how much money we have, our national parks and forests were designed to give everyone the opportunity to experience the beautiful natural wonders of our country. For people who live in the environmental justice communities, like those in my district, in the 13th district, they are typically low income, predominantly of color. Our federal lands for recreation often feel like a million miles away. They instead are subjected to, negative amount of pollution and an exorbitant amount. I have one of the most polluted zip codes in the state of Michigan, and it causes a number of negative health impacts. So when we are living in environmental justice communities with polluted air and water, what some of my residents, my neighbors call, in some communities, sacrifice zones, you're not likely to feel any connection to the environment through our, beautiful, pristine public lands. But groups across the country like Outdoor Afro are fighting to change that and making outdoor recreation, our nature, and conservation accessible to everyone, especially those that haven't had the opportunity. In Detroit, we are so fortunate, Chairman, to have the National Wildlife Federation's Detroit Leadership and Environmental Education Program, or what we call LEAP, I believe. This program connects Detroit students to the environment through a project-based outdoor environmental curriculum that is cultivating a new generation of conservation leaders in the environmental justice communities. It is the very first year. With all challenges of COVID pandemic, 32 students and their family members went on more than 40 hikes and nature excursions all across Michigan, from visiting the incredible Sleeping Bear Dunes in northern Michigan to producing 10 gallons of maple syrup in Detroit's Rouge Park. The effects these experiences have had on our Detroit's youth are immeasurable. One student said, quote, "I've always been afraid to go in forest, but now I love hiking. Me and my grandmother go hiking together on the weekends." Another student trying kayaking for the first time said, quote, "I didn't know I would be so good at this." These are experiences that will be remembered a lifetime and passed on to children after children, so generations to come. And so this is why I'm so excited to be talking to all of you today and asking colleagues to please support the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act. While these groups are doing incredible work, the federal government can do much more to facilitate these connections between our environmental justice communities and public lands. My bill will require Secretaries of Interior and Agriculture to complete a report studying the use of special recreation permits by communities like mine, the environmental justice communities. They have to identify barriers and best practices and make recommendations for federal action to increase public land recreation access. So facilitating connections between our communities and public lands is just the beginning of winning our fight for truly having environmental justice for our residents. The 13th district, which I lovingly call 13 District Strong, and so many other communities across the country like it, not only deserve the ability to experience and enjoy clean air in our lands all across the country, but also to have their children grow up knowing what fresh air actually feels like in their own backyards. These are not new problems, y'all. For generations, millions of Americans, mostly Black and Brown, Indigenous communities, have grown up believing, like I did, that the smell of sulfur dioxide is normal, or that the smog-filled skies are like everyone else's. No one, Chairman, deserves to live under the environmental conditions simply because of where they were born. So again, no one deserves to have their lifespan cut short by decades because of what zip code they were born in. As a Congress, we must do more to help our communities. And I thank my colleague, Chairman Neguse, for holding this hearing today. And I look forward to working with all of you to further infuse environmental justice for everyone into everything that our federal government does. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Philippe, for your testimony. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Appreciate it. To acknowledge Chairman Grijalva and Ranking Member Westerman and Chairman Neguse for hosting and for running this, Ranking Member Fulcher. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to testify. This is not a backdrop, everybody. This is the actual great outdoors in my district, and I'm thrilled to be out here testifying on behalf of the bipartisan legislation, HR 3113, the MAPland Act. Our great nation is blessed with some of the most scenic landscapes in the world. Those who live in and visit my home state of Utah know that some of life's best memories can be made on a raft in Flaming Gorge, even if it's windy, on trails in Arches National Park or when they're hunting in the high Uintas. Each year, millions of Americans take advantage of the unrivaled beauty and grandeur of our nation's outdoor spaces. This number grows each year. Outdoor recreation not only improves the health and quality and the life of millions, but it also represents an important sector of the American economy. According to estimates from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the outdoor industry's economic output is roughly $788 billion, and in this industry supports more than 5.2 million jobs nationwide. Our ability to recreate on our lands is wholly reliant on our ability to access these lands. Public lands that provide recreation opportunities can be found in every state. Infrastructure investments, mobile devices, and other innovations have made access to these lands easier than ever. However, there are still obstacles in the way that restrict our ability to enjoy these lands. In some cases, this is due to the mixed public and private land ownership. In other circumstances, outdated, inconsistent, and unreliable data sources prevent users from accessing these lands. To illustrate this point, reports indicate that tens of thousands of easement records are still held on paper files. I think that's the fundamental point of this legislation. I introduced the MAPland Act with my good friends, Representative Fulcher, Neguse, Trier, to fix this. If passed, the MAPland Act would direct federal land management agencies to digitize and standardize mapping records so that Americans can use modern technology to access critically important information about how to access our public lands. This would help land users better understand which lands are open to the public, the status information on whether certain roads are open, which vehicles are allowed in certain areas, and much, much more. Not only would the MAPland Act improve our ability to recreate, but it would also help us more fully understand the access challenges we face across the country. For example, a recent study by the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, they identified 9.5 million acres of federal land in the West that are inaccessible because they are landlocked by private landowners. Modernizing and making our data more accessible can help us locate management issues and take necessary corrective action. The MAPland Act will enhance equitable access and help Americans from all walks of life enjoy our outdoor spaces. For a family interested in visiting a pristine location, the MAPland Act will help give them tools that they need to avoid nearby private properties and create a memorable experience for a lifetime. For a fisherman who wants to enjoy a morning on the river, the MAPland Act will facilitate access to better data about public access points along the river. This list goes on. To illustrate this, Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record 3 letters that list more than 100 organizations and groups that support the MAPland Act. Making it easier for Americans to recreate on our federal lands will also improve our ability to fund important conservation programs that enhance and protect habitats across the nation. It will also ensure that agencies are able to make the most of the funding they receive through the Great American Outdoors Act and the Land Water Conservation Fund. GPS data has revolutionized outdoor recreation. As technology has improved, so too has our ability to enjoy the world around us. The MAPland Act will help us continue in this direction and will ensure that the millions of Americans are able to enjoy our outdoor spaces as much as possible. It's been an honor to be a part of a collective group of outdoor enthusiasts, as well as, again, colleagues from Congress to move this along. And I'm very, very hopeful. I'm excited for this to be something on the front end of my time in Congress, to have a good, solid bipartisan bill that everybody hopefully can get behind. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for allowing me to be here, and I will yield my 37 seconds back.
Gentleman yields back. The unanimous consent request without objection is approved, and the letters will be submitted to the record. Thank you, Mr. Moore, for your testimony, and I want to thank you and Ms. Tlaib and all the sponsor members of Congress for their valuable testimony. Now we will transition to our second panel. As with the first panel, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be made part of the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will start. It will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining and red when your time has expired. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. The first witness that the chair will now recognize is Mr. Mark Lambrecht, Assistant Director of National Conservation Lands and Community Partnerships at the Bureau of Land Management. Sir, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Neguse and Ranking Member Westerman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Mark Lambrecht. As the chair mentioned, I'm Assistant Director of National Conservation Lands and Community Partnerships for the BLM. I want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on behalf of the BLM on HR 3670, the Simplifying Outdoor Access for Recreation Act, the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act, and on HR 3113, the Modernizing Access to Our Public Land or MAPLAND Act. The Department of the Interior supports the overall goals of these bills, which align well with Secretary Howland's priorities to build healthy communities and economies, advance environmental justice, and provide safe and equitable access to outdoor recreation for all Americans. Increasing public access to the outdoors for all people and offering opportunities to fully enjoy our nation's public lands, including for communities that have disproportionately less access to nature, is an important priority for the Secretary. Additionally, President Biden's call to action in Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad, supports improving access to recreation, revitalizing local economies, creating opportunities for underrepresented communities, and protecting our national treasures. Achieving these goals will involve working collaboratively to pursue conservation approaches that benefit local communities, support biodiversity and healthy ecosystems, and expand economic growth. The BLM is one of several land managing agencies with the department, offering tremendous outdoor recreation opportunities on our nation's shared public lands. The public lands managed by the BLM host a remarkable variety of recreational activities, and BLM lands supported more than 73 million recreational visits last year, an increase of 3 million over 2019. The National Park System, which preserves some of our most important national treasures, hosts over 330 million visitors every year, and the National Wildlife Refuge System provides world-renowned places to see iconic animals and partake in a variety of outdoor activities. The water projects of reclamation, which is the largest wholesale water supplier in the nation, are among America's most popular sites for water-based outdoor recreation. The Federal Lands Recreation and Enhancement Act enables agencies to create, improve, and maintain recreation opportunities all over the country. Under FLREA, the federal land managing bureaus collect fees on federal recreational lands and waters. The revenues collected allow the federal government to implement projects that benefit visitors, such as improving accessibility, maintaining recreation sites, and building informational exhibits. FLREA also authorizes agencies to issue special recreation permits, allowing commercial, competitive, group, and individual recreation uses of the public lands and waters. These permits are issued to manage visitor use, protect recreational and natural resources, and provide for the health and safety of visitors. The BLM administers approximately 4,700 SRPs per year. HR 3670 aims to improve the process and reduce the cost of applying for and administering SRPs, and authorizes single joint SRPs for multi-jurisdictional trips across federal lands. The department supports efforts to improve the permitting process for SRPs as we continue to pursue opportunities to facilitate increased recreational access for all Americans, especially underserved communities. We would also like to continue to work with the sponsors on certain modifications to the bill, which are identified in written testimony submitted for the record. The Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act requires the department to submit a report to Congress on estimated use of SRPs by recreation service providers serving environmental justice communities. The department strongly supports the goal of promoting equitable use of public lands by all Americans, especially communities of color, low-income communities, and rural and indigenous communities that have long suffered disproportionate and cumulative harm from pollution and toxic sites. H.R. 3113 directs agencies to collaborate on the collection, sharing, and publication of public lands, recreation, and travel management data. We believe the bill has the potential to address some long-standing challenges surrounding public access and data management, and we look forward to working with the sponsor and subcommittee to address a number of technical issues. The BLM appreciates the subcommittee's interest in these important topics and your efforts to promote recreational use of public lands. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Ms. Jennifer Eberlein, Associate Deputy Chief of the National Forest System at the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity for the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service to discuss our views on the SOAR Act, the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act, the SHRED Act, and the MAPLands Act. USDA supports the overall goals of these bills to improve recreational access. Our national forests and grasslands offer some of the most readily available and valuable outdoor recreation settings in the country. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Americans turned to their public lands for respite and relaxation in greater numbers than at any other time in recent history. The number of recreation visits to the National Forest System rose to over 168 million in 2020, an increase of over 12% when compared to 2019. And with COVID numbers improving, we look forward to offering more recreation options this year as our developed campgrounds and recreation sites continue to reopen across the country. Many Americans are introduced to the outdoors through an activity that is provided through a recreation special use permit. These permits enable private sector professionals and educational institutions to lead a wide variety of activities on public lands, from whitewater rafting, downhill skiing, horseback riding, and big game hunting, to youth education trips in the wilderness and scenic Jeep tours. The Forest Service values the important role played by outfitters and guides, resorts, and other partners in connecting our citizens to their natural world. Recreation on National Forest System land is also an important economic driver that contributes more than $13.5 billion to America's gross domestic product and supports more than 161,000 full and part-time jobs. The Forest Service administers over 30,000 recreation special use authorizations, including 122 ski area permits and over 8,000 outfitter and guide permits. These activities generate nearly $2 billion to the permit holders. This would not be possible without the recreation assets managed by the Forest Service, including over 150,000 miles of trails, the largest trail network in the nation, and ski areas that host over 60% of the country's ski area visits. The SHRED Act would allow a portion of permit fees from ski areas to be retained to benefit recreation needs. USDA supports this bill and would like to work with the committee on technical improvements. Retained permit fees would improve recreation opportunities that contribute to local economic activity across 122 ski resort communities operating on National Forest System lands. These improvements would spur industry growth and generate additional revenue for ski areas. The SOAR Act seeks to improve the recreational permitting process through increased flexibilities. USDA supports the overall intent of the SOAR Act to modernize our recreation permitting program. We would like to work with the committee to avoid duplication of existing agency efforts and make targeted changes to ensure proper implementation. The Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act requires federal public land management agencies to collect information from recreation permittees on the use of their services by environmental justice communities. USDA supports the intent of this bill, specifically the identification of barriers impacting environmental justice communities and permit holders when trying to access and enjoy public lands. The Maplands Act directs the Forest Service and other agencies to jointly develop standards for outdoor recreation data related to federal lands. USDA supports the goal of this bill to enhance access to public lands by providing more digital data online for public use. Outdoor recreation provides millions of Americans rich opportunities to connect with their lands and heritage. The USDA Forest Service is honored to serve this vital link, and we are committed to addressing any barrier that impairs equitable access to our public lands. We again thank the committee for the opportunity to provide testimony today and look forward to working together on these important bills.
Thank you for your valuable testimony. I want to thank both of the witnesses. Reminding the members that Committee Rule 3, subparagraph D, imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions that they may wish to ask the witnesses. And we will start. I want to make sure that there is ample time for everyone to be able to ask questions. And so why don't we start with Mr. Sablon, who I believe is with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman, for holding this hearing. I have no questions of the witnesses, and therefore I pass. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sablon. The chair will now recognize Mr. Westerman for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As a point of clarification, are we just questioning panel 1 now, or are we questioning all panels?
We are questioning panel 2.
Panel 2, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Associate Deputy Chief Eberline, I've heard time and time again from constituents of mine who have either gotten tickets from the Forest Service or been threatened with tickets from the Forest Service for using off-highway vehicles on roads, not roads that are closed, but roads that are open to other vehicular traffic. As a matter of fact, I got a report from an elderly gentleman who was recreating on the Ouachita National Forest last year. He wasn't even his OHV, but a Forest Service ranger came up and told him that if he didn't get his OHV off of Forest Service property, he was going to be ticketed for using it on Forest Service property. He was so upset that he left and didn't come back. And for the life of me, I can't understand why we allow roads to be used for everything from 4-wheel drive vehicles to passenger cars to log trucks, but we prohibit OHVs on these roads. The only explanation I've received from the Forest Service, and this is not this administration, it's previous administrations, is that some of these OHVs get off the road and drive through the forest, drive through stream beds, which if that's a problem, I would say the solution is to punish the guilty, not punish everybody else because of a few bad actors. So my question to you is, will you commit to working with me and my staff to ensure that Forest Service regulations do not prohibit off-highway vehicle use on roads that are open to other forms of vehicular traffic?
Mr. Westerman, I would be happy to work with you and your staff to explore and look at the issue and see if we can find the solutions.
Well, I appreciate that. And we do have I'm on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and we've got a markup on the Surface Transportation Bill with the Federal Lands Transportation as part of that. So we'll be looking at some amendments over in the T&I Committee as well. So that's something as we talk about access, especially older people or handicapped people who their only way they may be able to recreate on federal lands is on an off-highway vehicle. And I can understand if it's a closed road, but if we've got roads open for other vehicular traffic, we should at least let people use these roads to recreate on. Mr. Lambert, on the the American public is using technology at an increasing rate. We have apps on our phones to know when and where we are. Hunters are using platforms like Onyx, and hikers and climbers and snow sports enthusiasts are using apps like All Trails. visitors expect to see on their phones what trails are open and closed so they know where they can access public lands and what the use restrictions are. Why is the BLM so far behind the private sector when it comes to digitally providing this type of information? And how would the Mapland Act help you improve access for outdoor recreationists?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Westerman. It's good to see you again. So the short answer is we have a lot of files that are paper-based that are away in storage. And so we're working really hard to try to access all those files, digitize them. Certainly the Mapland Act provides additional direction to the agency to make progress on that. But in the meantime, we are part of a Federal Geographic Data Committee, which is an interagency committee to develop the proper strategies to address this issue. We've also are implementing the Mineral Land Record System, and as part of the Dingle Act, which has a lot of overlap with this act, doing the BLM Public Lands Access Project, where we already have received over 2,000 public priority access nominations. So we're working really hard to address this need that you stated, and agree that it's an important need for the public and for hunters and other recreationists. So we're making great progress on this, but we look forward to additional direction from the legislation.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I can't find the timer on my computer, so I'm not sure how much time I have left.
You got about 13 seconds, Ranking Member.
All right. Well, my question would be also to the Forest Service, similar to what I asked the BLM about what could be accomplished through the Mapland Act.
All right. Gentleman's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Very similar, thank you, and very similar as Mr. Lambrecht had said. Certainly any information is helpful that we have in order to be able to improve our information, improve our records. So we look forward for the Maplands Act to be able to show progress and work with that, work with the legislation in order to improve information.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Representative DeGette.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for having this important hearing. Both the chairman and I have been working really hard on preservation of public lands, not just in Colorado, but throughout the West. And we have a number of unique challenges, one of them being population growth in these regions, but another one being climate change. And so, Mr. Lambrecht, I want to ask you, it's no secret that the climate crisis will increasingly impact people's ability to recreate on public lands, and many recreational service providers are facing increased challenges due to seasonal variability. How would the permit flexibilities and extension of seasonal recreation opportunities provided in the SOAR Act help address those challenges?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. It's a good one. And certainly we are seeing impacts on BLM lands from climate change. We're also seeing its impacts on recreational use. We've seen an increase of 3 million visitors during the pandemic, and we're seeing a lot of increased use on dispersed recreational use across our lands. So it presents a management challenge for sure. Just to answer your question though, the SOAR Act would be a benefit to our management challenges. For example, if we had a multi-jurisdictional permit as would be authorized by the SOAR Act, and we had an outfitter who had a planned outing with their clients over a number of different camping sites, and we had a wildfire situation, it would allow the outfitter to have one point of contact with one agency to amend their plan and choose alternate camping sites to accommodate their clients. So
that's exactly the kind of flexibility that a lot of us think is so important. And Ms. Epperlein, I wanted to ask you, specific to Forest Service permit reviews, the SOAR Act provides waivers for circumstances beyond the control of the permit holder, like seasonal variability or natural disasters. How is the Forest Service currently working to incorporate climate change into land management and recreation planning, including the availability of special recreation permits?
Thank you, Congresswoman. And one example that I would say in land management is completing fuels mitigation efforts across national forest lands, which is a benefit to everyone, our visitors and our partners, by reducing fire risk. We also need to be more flexible with availability of recreation permits as an adaptation for climate change. So non-use of permits due to fire closures, due to flooding is becoming more of an issue. So we're working with our partners to be as flexible as possible to provide options for continued use.
That's great. Now, are periods of non-use becoming more common as a result of climate change or other seasonal variability?
We certainly recognize that the inability for a permit holder to use all of their service days is becoming more of a concern. And we are working with our partners to be as flexible as possible to provide options for their continued use in the event that a road or an area is closed due to flooding or fire.
Okay. And lastly, how would the SOAR Act help the Forest Service to be able to issue special recreation permits?
Again, as we recognize in our even firefighting season, recreation is not one season anymore. It is an all year-round opportunity and recreation requests, needs by our public. So certainly the permit flexibilities will allow us to have that greater ability to meet our customers, our partners, and our visitors' needs.
Great. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, again, thanks for having this important hearing, and I yield back.
Thank you. The gentlewoman yields back. The chairman now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Fulcher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman DeGoose, and also appreciate Ranking Member Westerman for pinch hitting for me while I was disposed a little bit earlier. But the first question is for
no one can follow you, but he did his best.
I think he's got strong capabilities, but thank you. Associate Deputy Chief Eberlein, a question for you, please. First of all, a statement, then a follow-up question. In the West, there's nearly 16 million acres of landlocked public lands. And that's where the local, state, and federal parcels are surrounded by private property. And there's no public roads or trails to reach them. And each of those inaccessible acres represent lost outdoor recreational opportunities. My own state has nearly 300,000 of those landlocked acres of government land. And so, Associate Deputy Chief Eberlein, in your testimony, you mentioned that the Forest Service has a public-facing geospatial layer for easements. And that's a good thing. But you didn't mention how much there's left to do on that effort. And going back to June of 2019, your agency told the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee that only 5,000 of the 37,000 known easements had been digitized and made publicly available through the U.S. Forest Service Land Status Record System. Can you please give us an update on that? Where do we stand with that as of June of 2021?
We are slowly making progress. Thank you, Congressman, for the question too. And we're slowly making progress. It is challenging. And then also this MAPLands Act would certainly benefit by having the support in terms of our interagency effort around getting our easements digitized. I don't have an exact number, but we are slowly making progress.
Associate Director, if you could please look into that and let the committee know, or the subcommittee. That would be really helpful if you do that. I'm going to move on just due to time, and that's Assistant Director Lambrecht. A question for you, please. Your agency has both easements and reservations. And before the BLM gets rid of land through an exchange or a disposal of some sort, they sometimes will reserve formal access rights across that land. So that your agency and the public can still access the remaining holdings. Now, these access reservations are similar to easements, and I understand the BLM has finished its work for Montana and the Dakotas. Can you confirm that? And also, just similarly, can you give us an update on how far the BLM is with digitizing these easements and reservations and just where it stands with other states?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. So to answer your question, yes, yeah, there are some legacy reservations across when the BLM disposes or prior disposed of land, sometimes they would retain access reservations. And so as we've been going through the process of going through the property records to identify opportunities to enhance public access, we've been identifying those, trying to convert some of those to easements in some cases and dispose of them as appropriate. This is an ongoing process. When we administer 245 million acres of land, that's a big job. And so, you know, with the resources that we have and the direction that we have, we're doing the best we can. We believe we're making significant progress. And with this passage of this legislation, we believe we'll have additional direction and perhaps resources to make even more progress.
That was going to be my next question, if this legislation will help in that. You've already answered that question, but similar to what I asked of Associate Deputy Chief Eberline, if you could please also just look into that a little bit deeper and let the subcommittee know a little bit more specifically where that stands, that would be very helpful. And with that, I will return and yield back to the esteemed chairman from Colorado, Chairman Neguse.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Representative Tonko for 5 minutes. It looks like Representative Tonko is no longer with us. I know we have competing hearings today. The chair would recognize Representative Tlaib if she is here. Oh no, Representative Tonko is with us, so we'll go to Representative Tonko.
Thank you, Chair Neguse. I was having a conflict of scheduling here, but happy to join you. Can you hear me?
We can. Thank you for being here.
Okay, great. My question is to Mr. Lambert. Especially those who may have the least.
Mr. Tonko, if you could just repeat the beginning of the question, I think we lost you for a minute.
To access our public lands, including environmental justice and low-wealth communities.
Mr. Lambrecht, were you able to hear the question?
I apologize, Mr. Chairman, I was not.
No worries at all. Mr. Tonko, if you could try repeating your question once more, it seems the connection there is a bit frozen. Okay, well, let's do this. Mr. Tonko, we're going to come back to you in just a moment. We'll go to Mr. Tiffany for his question, and then we'll circle back to Mr. Tonko.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, am I with you?
You are. We can hear you, Mr. Tiffany. You may proceed.
Ms. Eberline, I'd like to direct a question to you. In your testimony, you acknowledge that your agency supports the goal of enhancing access to the National Forest System lands by providing the specified data digitally for online use by the public. That's good. I think your recognition of that is common sense. I'm holding an example of a hunting closure map that you can presently find only by searching the order notices on the individual forest website or looking for physical signage. Given our modern technology and capabilities, do you believe that this type of notice, found only by scouring the agency's website, is sufficient anymore? Shouldn't we be providing the public with better, more accessible information than this?
I agree that we do need to certainly upgrade and update our digital and electronic data. Absolutely, Mr. Tiffany.
Yeah, I just think about the road closures up here in the Chewamga, Nicolay, where I live here in northern Wisconsin. Yeah, there's that map. And thank you for putting that up. And it's deeply concerning to many people that with the additional road closures, we're talking about access to the public with these bills. Yet, that's exactly what's been happening here for probably 20 years is we've been denying access to people. I know certainly in our neighborhood here in northern Wisconsin, and everything I understand from my colleagues, it's even worse out west, that I think there are just administrative efforts that could be taken up by any administration, Republican or Democrat, to allow additional access. And I would say one other thing in regards to this. The money is in the forest for providing much of this access and offering additional amenities, things like that for people who want that. What we're talking about is getting more people out into the wild. And just here in northern Wisconsin on Chewamga-Nicolay National Forest, we did a rigorous study about a decade ago, and we've left about $250 million worth of value over the last 25 years on this forest here in northern Wisconsin. That would pay for much of this that we're talking about, including improving facilities, roads, things like that. I think the opportunity is before us if we would just take administrative action to make that happen. One further question, if I may, and that is, under the bill HR 3687, will you be identifying people accessing public facilities by race?
That is something that we're happy to work with the committee on in terms of looking at the types of data and information that would be helpful to identify barriers.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm deeply concerned that does this ultimately lead to quotas? We want everyone to have access to our great national parks, national forests, and all the rest. But injecting race into it, I don't think makes any sense. I thought the representative from Michigan brought up a much better solution that does not require government action. And that is NGOs, like she mentioned, the National Wildlife Federation. You have other groups like the National Resources Defense Council, Sierra Club, many others. They're among the wealthiest NGOs that you'll find in the country and in the world. That would be a much better solution. Rather than turning to government, put the challenge out to them that they could provide the funding. Rather than filing more lawsuits, things like that, take that money and give it to perhaps kids in the Detroit area to allow them to be able to see those great natural resources, including places like in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which I neighbor and which my family goes up there oftentimes to recreate in. I think the opportunity is to go to those NGOs and say, pump some of that money rather into lawsuits, put it into getting more underprivileged kids, regardless of race or ethnicity, out into the wild to enjoy those great things that we are all talking about here today. But it does deeply disturb me that are we headed towards a quota system here? Because we've seen legislation already pass in this Congress where we have farmers that do not are being told do not apply for certain programs because of your race. We have restaurateurs who are being told do not apply for certain programs that have passed in bills this session as a result of your race. That is one of the worst things that we can possibly do and will divide society further. I hope we're not heading down this path. Finally, I would just say this. We're hearing about the underpinning of climate change. Let's all remember, climate change is a model. It's all based on models. And I'm going to give you a real world example from right up here where I live, here on the Great Lakes. Back in 2004 to 2011 was one of the driest periods of time that we've seen since we've had settlement here in northern Wisconsin, besides the indigenous peoples. It was even drier than the Dust Bowl years from 2004 to 2011. The Great Lakes were down significantly, including Lake
Mr. Tiffany, you're over about 30 seconds, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to just close. So
thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to wrap up real quick. We were told that's because of climate change that those lakes were down so far. Now they're at unprecedented high levels, and we're being told it's climate change once again. You wonder why the public is confused and they do not list this as a top 10 item that they're concerned about, is because The evidence is very conflicting whether this is happening or not due to something called climate change, which is just based on a model. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Tonko. I believe he is back with us. Mr. Tonko. And I believe you are muted, Mr. Tonko.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. We can hear you great.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. We'll go back to Mr. Lambrecht. What are some of the efforts the Department of the Interior is taking to ensure that public lands are accessible for all Americans, but especially those who may have the least means to access our public lands, including environmental justice in low-wealth communities?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. So the foremost example of what we're doing is the Land and Water Conservation Fund program is administered under my directorate. And most recently, we incorporated the administration's priorities into the ranking criteria for the projects under consideration of the program. That includes serving underrepresented communities, environmental justice communities. And so that has become a significant priority for identifying key acquisitions or other projects to serve those communities. Also, the department is interested in the legislation as it relates to helping us identify data about environmental justice communities and how they're accessing, or the kind of challenges that they're having access recreational opportunities on our public lands. So we look forward to accessing some of that information and having conversations with these communities, how we can improve or enhance their experience.
I thank you for that. I think that certainly the legislation is before us is trying to help and develop that concept. So, Ms. Eberlein, what are some of the efforts the Forest Service is taking to ensure accessibility for all Americans?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Tonko. And certainly we're looking at all of our existing data and working with our communities and advocates to identify the barriers that may be out there. We're meeting with numerous partner organizations and affiliate groups to discuss how to better engage with underserved and underrepresented communities. And then also in this fiscal year, we were one of the first land management agencies to receive funding under the Native Act. And it is an act that has the objective of enhancing and integrating Native American tourism in federal agency planning. Like my BLM colleague there, we also have been working into ranking criteria in our Land and Water Conservation Fund Act, as well as our prioritization around Great American Outdoors projects as well.
Thank you. And what tools and information, and I perhaps ask this of both of you, what are some of the tools and information that the Environmental Justice in Recreation Permitting Act, what are those tools that would provide in support of these efforts?
Well, certainly, thank you for the question. Certainly, any data that allows us to have a better understanding and identify barriers will be very welcome for us to be able to work on that in order to provide that equitable access for all Americans.
And Mr. Lambrecht, any tools that you would cite that would be useful in these endeavors?
Thank you, Congressman. Yeah, the tools that we would look for that would be potentially developed by the legislation would be assistance in us being able to access some of the data that I mentioned, rec.gov, which is the one-stop shop that recreational users access to gather permits and recreational opportunities. If we were able to gather better data from there, then we could understand where our recreational users are coming from, cross-reference that data with the very helpful interactive map that the Environmental Protection Agency provides on where environmental justice communities are located. So we're looking at cross-referencing that data and examining it so we can learn more about what the situation is.
Thank you. That would be tremendous. So with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Tonko, gentleman yields back. The chair would now recognize Mr. Gomer for 5 minutes.
There we go. He's been unmuted. Is it Eberline, Mr. Eberline? Is that correct pronunciation? No, do you justice?
Thank you. Yes, it's Eberline.
Okay, thank you. Well, are any of the proposals in the bills that are being discussed today, do they appear to be redundant?
They're not redundant. Thank you, Mr. Gomer. And they're not redundant. They're complementary to some of the activities that we're having already in the Forest Service.
And what would that be?
We're looking at, we've been embarking on some of our recreation permit modernization. We've been looking at and have been starting to work on electronic permits, updating our databases. We have been training our employees in being prepared and ready for electronic and digital services that would complement many of the programs that have, many of the options that they have in these legislation.
Well, why is the potential for automatically renewing existing permits under 3670 of concern to some people, as far as you're aware?
Well, we do have the ability currently to be able to have some permits be able to be automatically renewed. And certainly the SOAR Act would support that and expand some of the flexibilities that we have already.
Right. So is there no concern at all about any of the automatic renewals that may take place under the new bill?
I would say we want to make sure that any kind of clauses or any new updated information as part of a permit would be able to be inserted into any renewal on a permit.
Yeah, with that, but if it were automatic, then you may not have that opportunity to insert that language, correct?
Aspects that we'd like to work with the committee to ensure that we have some opportunities to do that upon renewal.
Okay, so but you're hoping that there will be some small modifications to those provisions then, correct?
We are working, we're hoping to work with the committee to do that, to have those technical modifications.
And I understand from what's been testified to, the Forest Service and the BLM, you want very much to work on the issue of climate change. I was informed by the immediate past director of NASA that they have found that the moon's orbit is changing slightly, and so is the Earth's orbit around the sun. We know there's been significant solar flare activity. And so is there anything that the National Forest Service or BLM can do to change the course of the moon's orbit or the Earth's orbit around the sun? Obviously, that would have profound effects on our climate.
I would have to follow up with you on that one, Mr. Gomert.
Yeah. Well, if you figure out a way that you in the Forest Service can make that change, I'd like to know. Also, just to put on your radar, as the Associate Deputy Chief in the National Forest System, we've got a couple of national forests in East Texas in my district, and I get complaints regularly about whether it's culverts not being repaired. It's almost as if the Forest Service wants the land for themselves, but not for the public. We also know that in our poorer rural counties that have a significant amount of national forests, they went from receiving their portion of proceeds from the renewed resource of pine trees. They went from getting $1.6 million to when you're 64,000. And the stewardship program, in some of our local government's opinion, is being used to prevent them from sharing in the proceeds by putting money into a stewardship program that they're told, oh, this will benefit the entire county, the community, but they can't see the benefit, and they certainly notice that money being put off limits to them getting 25%. So I would hope that y'all would take another look at just how the stewardship program is being implemented. But I thank you, and I see my time has expired. Yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize Ms. Tlaib if she is still with us. If not, the chair will now recognize Mr. Gallego.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm having a tough time pulling up the testimony so far, but I am intrigued that there was an earlier conversation regarding trying to balance out access for different communities versus not specifically targeting communities. I think that was a comment by the good representative from Wisconsin. With that in mind, is there a way? And I apologize, I'm trying to get all my. Cannot get my camera to see you guys. I'm sure you can hear me. Is that correct?
Yes, we can hear you and see you, Mr. Gallego.
Okay, I apologize. I just cannot, for the life of me, get to it. I guess my question is just to the panel. It's possible for us to actually have a balanced approach to making sure that there's access to public lands, while at the same time not particularly making it feel exclusionary. And I'd love to hear the panel of kind of just talk about that, just more in response to what the good gentleman from Wisconsin was saying.
Why don't we hear from the Forest Service first and then the BLM?
Certainly. Thank you, Congressman Gallego. Of course, we're looking to expand and broaden all access for American citizens. But a few of the opportunities that we provide to have outreach and ensuring that we have access to underserved or underrepresented communities is the Youth Conservation Corps. We host about 1,500 youth for immersive work, learning, and recreation summer experience. We have an Urban Connections program where we specifically outreach and have efforts aimed at agencies' engagement to those who don't live near a national forest and may be in more urban centers away from the national forest lands. It's a unique conduit that we really work hard with urban leaders and other state and federal agencies to connect citizens to the land. And then also our conservation education program works with multiple partners such as the Ad Council and Corazon Latino to support those underserved communities and encourage underserved communities and their representatives to participate in recreation and education activities.
So and someone else from the panel?
Yes, thank you, Congressman Mark Lambrecht with the BLM here. And much like the Forest Service, the BLM has a number of different programs that address providing equitable access to the outdoors for all Americans, including we have Youth Corps, volunteer program, education programs. We have a new directive on Civilian Climate Corps, which is going to have a large diversity of participation is our plan. And so the other point that I'd like to make is I think the public demonstrated access to outdoor recreation was critical during the pandemic. Help provide social distancing, and it's just access to a healthy recreational opportunity for Americans. And so we want to ensure that those types of opportunities are available to all Americans, which is why I mentioned in my answer to a previous question, we're interested in learning more about who the users of BLM's lands are so that we can have conversations with environmental justice communities and other underrepresented communities about what types of opportunities we need to look for to enhance or improve their experience.
And Ms. Robley, how would the SOAR Act expand opportunities for underserved communities to experience the outdoors? And how is the current permitting system making it more difficult for underserved communities to experience the outdoors?
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that a question for me?
Betsy Robley.
No.
Mr. Geigo, I believe that question will be for our third panel.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I apologize.
All right.
Then I guess like my general question and then just a general comment, being a first generation American, I actually did not really get to experience and really understand, our national parks, national forests until way later in life when I'd educated myself. And especially in places like in Arizona, where 60% of our land is owned by the federal government, these types of programs are actually really important in that regard, because it really shows and brings people to the land that they pay taxes for. And at the same time, it's not that we're trying to exclude anybody else, but it's a way for us to bring more and more people. And I see this not just when it comes to public lands, but also for other things, such as teaching new men and women how to hunt, especially if they come from countries that don't really have a tradition of hunting or fishing or camping. And I think that's something that we should really think as a value added, not necessarily as something that's separating people. In that regard, thank you, and I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize Mr. Moore, if he is with us. All right. The chair will now recognize Ms. Teresa Lidra Fernandez, if she's with us.
Yes, I am. Good morning. And thank you, Mr. Chair, and to each of the sponsors of these bills and these witnesses. They are excellent. I often say if we take care of our public lands, they'll take care of us. But part of allowing public lands to take care of us is making sure that all Americans, right, regardless of racial, ethnic, geographic background, have access to our marvelous national treasures. I also want to emphasize, and I know we all agree on this, that access needs to be granted to those who originally inhabited these lands, and that Native Americans must be allowed to access and protect the places that they've long used as cherished sites for ceremonies and events. What some might not be as familiar with is that many of our forests in the Southwest were once part of Spanish and Mexican land grants held in common by Hispanic communities, including, my family going back a couple of centuries, where they gathered wood and grazed our sheep and cattle herds. Our use of these common lands was essential to our economic survival, and the loss of land was hard and is still being felt today. So I'll be reintroducing the Land Grant Mercedes Traditional Use Recognition and Consultation Act, which was originally introduced by former Representative Ben Ray Lujan, who's now our Senator Lujan. Assistant Director Lambrecht and or Associate Deputy Chief Eberlein, or both, as we continue to think about building back better, can you speak to the ongoing importance of providing access to the forests and lands used by Native American and former land grant heirs? For example, to main acequias and for other traditional use. And for those colleagues or others who might know what an acequia is, it's the traditional irrigation ditches that are found in the U.S. forests in the Southwest, and especially in New Mexico. Director Lambrecht or Chief Eberlein, I don't know who would like to start on that.
Congresswoman, could you please repeat the first part of your question? You kind of cut out there and I missed
okay.
it. I apologize.
My apologies. As we build back better, as we address these issues, I want to see how these bills, as well as your work, would make sure that we are providing access and use both for Native Americans and for some of these traditional users of the land.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the clarification. So to answer your question, which is a good one, as I mentioned before on testimony on the Environmental Justice Bill, we're looking to gather additional information that would be helpful for us to have further conversations with environmental justice communities about what their needs are to enhance their recreational access experience. Also, I should mention that in my directorate, I'm responsible for management of the nation's conservation lands. And so we are, as part of our management objective, we look for opportunities to provide for subsistence ceremonial uses within those those public lands. So that's always a priority within our Bureau, and I expect that to continue.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'll also say that MAP lands and the Environmental Justice Act would certainly provide better records, better understanding of access points and barriers, and just be able to have those conversations and be able to sit down with partners to talk through and be able to share and look for greater opportunities for access.
Great, thank you. I really do appreciate the idea, and if somebody could mute so I really do appreciate the ability and the healing power, right, of playing in our beautiful forests. And I understand that there's going to be a study soon that will suggest that areas with high green space values actually associated with reduced COVID-19 mortality rates. Can you please speak to the importance of providing permitted access to public lands and how proposals such as the SOAR Act, what that would mean to recreational service providers, you know, so we can expand that access, that healing power of our forests? Miss Eberlein or Mr. Lambrecht?
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman. We absolutely agree on the ongoing importance of providing access to those that have social, economic, and health challenges. And the pandemic certainly demonstrated the need for Americans to seek that healing and improving their well-being through in nature and being part of nature. So in the Forest Service, again, we host several programs that I'd mentioned: Youth Conservation Corps, Urban Connections, our education programs, and we work really closely with partners, with our providers, in order to expand opportunities to include more people, being able to have more access in order to get the healing aspects of nature. So that's what the SOAR Acts and many of these, all of these bills would be able to provide.
Thank you. I see my time has expired. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Obernolte for 5 minutes, if he is still with us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. I think we all share the common goal of ensuring better recreational access to our public lands. My first question is for Ms. Eberlein. In your written testimony, you had requested some changes to the MAP Lands Act, and one of the points that you made is that the Forest Service doesn't currently maintain information on water bodies that are closed to watercraft or have horsepower limitations. So I'm wondering if the Forest Service isn't making this information public currently, how are we expecting users of those bodies of water to access that information?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And yes, it is difficult for other jurisdictions or other data from other jurisdictions, such as water bodies, to be able to incorporate that into the federal data point. We certainly work with our communities, with our outreach with our partners, in order to provide the best local information as possible if we don't have the exact data within our federal records. That's something we always need to improve on. We'll continue to improve on.
Okay, thank you. So I wasn't clear in the testimony. Were you just talking about situations where other jurisdictions had created rules that the Forest Service wasn't aware of, or are these Forest Service regulations that aren't currently being made available to the public?
No, the issue or the concern that we'd like to work with the committee on is in order to see if there's other jurisdictions that own the data or have the data, how we would work with them in terms of MAP lands access in order to be able to understand that data.
Okay, I understand. I think we have a common purpose here. I understand the difficulty for the Forest Service, but if we're claiming that we're a nation based on the rule of law and we want people to follow the law, we need to be good at communicating to them what the law is. And I think that everyone's purpose would be served in making that easier for the public to access. So even though that might cause some difficulty, I think that's something I'm very much in support of. Second question for Mr. Lambrecht. In your written testimony, you had mentioned that BLM is currently developing the Mineral and Land Records System. And I'm wondering how much overlap that is with the requirements of the MapLand Act, and how much of the functionality required by the MapLand Act will be included as part of MLRS.
Thank you, Congressman. There is a lot of overlap there, and I think the MapLand Act would provide valuable additional direction to the MLRS effort. Also, the one issue that the primary issue that we've identified with the bill, however, is its aggressive time frame. 18 months for development of interagency geospatial data, we believe, is aggressive. And in our experience, we believe that 36 to 48 months would be more realistic for us to meet. So that's one of the changes that we would request that we could discuss with the sponsor in the subcommittee.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up because I had flagged that as well. I mean, we're talking about a large amount of work here, but on the other hand, this is not rocket science, right? So it seems like something that should be achievable in 18 months. Why on earth would you need 3 or 4 years to get this done?
Congressman, just for the sheer amount of data that has to be collected, as I mentioned previously, we manage 245 million acres of land. There's a lot of information out there that has to be collected and converted into a digital format, uploaded into a format that's accessible to the public. So there's a lot of work there, limited amount of resources to be able to accomplish that work, thus the timeline that's required to be able to accomplish it.
Okay. Well, you know, the MapLand Act is pretty broad in its requirements, in the terminology it uses to describe the requirements. And so maybe an alternative solution would be to be more specific about what's required rather than to expand the amount of time, because I don't think that all of the data that you're talking about is data that's going to be useful to the general public. And I think that was the intent of the MapLand Act, but I won't speak for the author on that. It's just an observation.
I appreciate your observation, and you know, we'd certainly look forward to having discussions with the sponsor and the subcommittee about what those clarifications would be.
All right, and last question for you, sir. The MLRS system, what is the timeline for implementation of that?
You know, I haven't been provided a timeline for completion of that project. I know it's ongoing, but I'd be happy to consult with the team that's working on that and get back to you promptly.
Okay, well, it just seems like there's so many synergies with the requirements of the MapLand Act that should that become law, you know, that would certainly dovetail nicely for you. Okay, well, thank you very much, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I want to thank both of our administration witnesses for their testimony today, certainly for their meaningful and thoughtful feedback, and you have my commitment as the chairman of the subcommittee to continue working with both of you and your respective agencies regarding any technical changes with respect to the bills that we're considering today. So, but again, I want to thank you both for your testimony. We will now, thank you. We'll now transition to our third panel. As with the first panels, oral statements are limited to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will be made part of the hearing record. When you begin, the timer will start and it will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining and red when your time has expired. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. I'll also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. Before introducing our witnesses, I'll remind non-administration witnesses that they are encouraged to participate in the Witness Diversity Survey created by the Congressional Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Witnesses may refer to the hearing invitation materials for further information. The chair now recognizes Ms. Betsy Robley, Conservation and Advocacy Director for the Mountaineers.
Thank you, Chairs Nagus and Grijalva, ranking members Fulcher and Westerman, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Betsy Robley, and I am the Conservation and Advocacy Director at the Mountaineers. The Mountaineers, based in Seattle, Washington, and founded in 1906, is a nonprofit outdoor education, conservation, and recreation organization whose mission is to enrich the community by helping people explore, conserve, learn about, and enjoy the lands and waters of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. Through Mountaineers programs, more than 1,600 skilled volunteers lead over 3,000 outdoor education trips and courses annually for 14,000 members. Our youth programs provide over 10,000 opportunities each year for children to get outside, half of which are for underserved youth. We appreciate the opportunity to provide testimony on the Simplifying Outdoor Access for Recreation Act. We'd like to thank Chair Neguse and the subcommittee for taking steps to advance legislation that will help ensure that everyone has access to our public lands. Like you, we believe in the value of transformative experiences in the outdoors. Many people's first experience recreating on public lands is through outdoor programs like the Mountaineers offer, or through a guide or outfitter. This is especially true for communities that have traditionally faced barriers to accessing the outdoors. However, the recreational permitting systems of the federal land management agencies make it difficult for outdoor leaders to take people outdoors. Outdoor programs like the Mountaineers must obtain special recreation permits to lead trips on public lands, but currently those systems are complex, inefficient, inconsistent, and labor intensive. The SOAR Act will make recreation permits easier for outdoor leaders to obtain and manage, and easier for agencies to administer. As an outdoor organization based in the Pacific Northwest, we continue to feel the negative effects of the bureaucratic barriers of outfitter guide permitting. We spend an enormous amount of staff and volunteer time navigating the various permitting processes of land management agencies. These convoluted systems are equally as challenging for under-resourced land managers to administer. For example, we currently teach rock climbing courses in Leavenworth, Washington, in the Okanagan-Wenatchee National Forest, but we're unable to teach rock scrambling courses in that location because the environmental assessment did not include scrambling activities. Despite the fact that scrambling is substantially similar to hiking and rock climbing, which are included in the EA, we are unable to obtain a permit for scrambling and instead teach these courses on private land. These challenges aren't just a bureaucratic headache. When outdoor education organizations like the Mountaineers aren't able to get the permits we need to conduct our programs, we miss out on opportunities to introduce young people to the wonders of nature and inspire the next generation of outdoor leaders and stewards. Fortunately, the SOAR Act gives us an opportunity to improve the efficiency and functionality of the federal outfitting and guiding permitting systems. The SOAR Act will direct the agencies to evaluate the process for issuing special recreation permits and identify ways to eliminate duplicative processes, reduce administrative costs, and shorten processing times. It will increase flexibility for outdoor leaders by allowing them to engage in activities that are substantially similar to the activities specified in their permit, which will help address the issues we face in Leavenworth. The bill improves transparency by directing agencies to notify the public when new recreation permits are available and requires the agencies to provide timely responses to permit applicants. And it simplifies the permitting process for trips involving more than one land management agency by authorizing the agencies to issue a single joint permit covering the lands of multiple agencies. Collectively, these common sense improvements will improve access to the outdoors, support the recreation economy, and inspire more people to care for our outdoor spaces. They will also make it easier for land managers to deliver on their mission of connecting Americans with their public lands. The issues with the outfitter guide permitting system being presented here today and the opportunities for lasting, meaningful improvement that are contained in the SOAR Act are a result of a careful collaborative process. This is evidenced by the wide range of outdoor industry stakeholders who support the bill. By passing the SOAR Act, Congress has the opportunity to come together around a set of common interests and enact positive change that will support the recreation economy and help ensure equitable access to the benefits of nature. Thank you for the opportunity to share a perspective, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Robley, for your important testimony. We appreciate it. The chair now recognizes Ms. Rue Mapp, founder and CEO of Outdoor Afro.
Thank you so much, Chair Neguse. Recognizing also Chairman Grijalva, Ranking Member Westerman, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Rue Mapp, and along with my fellow witnesses, I'm very excited to testify to the House Natural Resources Subcommittee on National Parks, Forests, and Public Lands legislative hearing on H.R. 3687, the Environmental Justice and Recreational Permitting Act today. You know, my love story began in nature with my family. My parents were from the South and migrated west to Oakland, California. But my dad, being a proud Texan and a cowboy, had a ranch that he set up in Lake County. And it was truly a fabulous way for me to grow up, learning how to connect with that local creek, to watch the evolution of a tadpole into a frog, to learn how to hunt and to fish, and importantly, to be in a space that had hospitality as its center. We had so many people from our church, from our committee, from our extended family and community who gathered several times a year. And I had the chance to see firsthand the importance of welcoming and hospitality in nature. So that value is really what sits at the heart of Outdoor Afro. And today our mission is so simple. It's to celebrate and inspire those connections, those Black connections in leadership in nature. And in 2009, I started a blog to talk about my family and to talk about all the things I loved about the outdoors. And since then, since 2009, Outdoor Afro has grown into a cutting-edge network, now in 33 states and the District of Columbia, 56 cities in total. And thank you, Ms. Talib, for your acknowledgement of our network in your district. Today, Outdoor Afro is a 501c3 national not-for-profit organization that provides nature-based programming through a network of over 100 leaders who reconnect over 40,000 Black people to the outdoors. So Outdoor Afro celebrates and inspires welcoming nature-based experiences that lift up Black history in nature and promote sustainable outdoor recreation and support of collective stewardship of our lands, wildlife, and waterways. So why does this bill matter to Outdoor Afro? Outdoor Afro volunteer leaders design and facilitate thousands of outdoor recreation experiences annually that are frequently hosted on public federal lands and require permitting to access the natural areas, including access to paddle expeditions, backpacking trips, and many other nature-based events. This proposed bill has significant implications to strengthening our capacity to better serve more Black people and communities in providing equitable access and agency while engaging in nature-based experiences by gathering data needed to inform decision-making. And we recognize the critical role that policy plays in our ability to connect more people to nature. And Outdoor Afro anchors our work in the following policy priorities. And these have guided us since our founding and really serve as our North Star today toward a world where life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is available to all people and beings. So priority one, connecting Black people to the outdoors. Our swimmership program was something that we started in response to the reality that Black youth were drowning at 5 times the rate of their white peers ages 5 through 19 as a result of prolonged segregation and exclusion from public pools and beaches. And so we are teaching every child in our sphere of influence to learn how to swim. So opportunities like this lead to more meaningful and extensive engagement with our natural places. And priority two, we want to reimagine Blackness in the outdoors by uncovering and amplifying the historical and ongoing contributions of Black people in the outdoors. And this bill would help us understand the role of Black Americans have had in outdoor recreation. And then 3, we want to continue to protect and enhance the outdoors. Recreating on our public lands has an impact on our lands, wildlife, and waterways. And this is why Outdoor Afro is committing to protecting and enhancing these places for long-term sustainability. So we've been providing recreational services to Black people and communities for more than 10 years, and we will continue to build on that community so that we can have data that helps us tell a more accurate story and that allows us to ensure equitable access, representation, meaningful participation, and quality outcomes for in the outdoors for all. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your important testimony. Ms. Mack, we appreciate you being here. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Alan Hensroth, Chief Operating Officer at Arapahoe Basin Ski Area, hailing from Colorado's beautiful 2nd Congressional District, which of course I'm proud to represent. Growing up in Tucson, Mr. Hensroth is an avid outdoorsman who has rode the Grand Canyon 8 times, and he loves to ski Pali, A Basin's marquee frontside lift. In addition to working at A Basin for over 30 years, 17 of those as Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Hensroth has been voted fan favorite in Summit County's Dancing with the Mountain Stars, an important recognition, and has a deep love for Tom Petty. Mr. Hensroth, welcome to the subcommittee. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. That dancing award seems to follow me around. Chairman Neguse, Ranking Member Fulcher, Committee Chair Grijalva, and Ranking Member Westerman, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on H.R. 3686, otherwise known as the SHRED Act. On behalf of Arapahoe Basin and the National Ski Areas Association, or NSAA, I would like to thank Chairman Neguse, whom I met with last week when he visited Breckenridge to discuss the bill with community leaders, and Representatives Custer, Curtis, and LaMalfa for their leadership in introducing this bipartisan measure. I serve as board chair for NSAA, which has 325 ski area members, 122 of which operate on National Forest System lands across 14 states. Arapahoe Basin first opened in 1946 in Colorado with 1 rope tow and a $1.25 lift ticket. We now offer over 1,400 acres, 9 lifts, the highest restaurant in North America at 12,500 feet, and legendary skiing and riding against a backdrop of stunning mountain views. A Basin is located on the White River National Forest, the most visited forest in the nation. The ski industry strongly supports H.R. 3686, which would retain approximately $27 million of the $40 million generated annually in ski area permit fees to improve the Forest Service recreation program and visitor services. The SHRED Act would benefit not just the agency and public ski areas, but all recreation permittees, National Forest visitors who are showing up in record numbers, and mountain communities. Ski areas greatly value our public-private partnership with the Forest Service. This partnership supports public health and fitness, fosters appreciation for our natural environment, and provides returns to the U.S. government through fees paid for use of the land. Over the past 10 years, ski areas nationwide have averaged 55 million visits annually, and 60% of those visits occur on public land. Skiers and snowboarders represent 20% of all Forest Service recreation visits. Retaining ski fees locally is necessary because funding and staffing of Forest Service recreation program sits at 40% of year 2000 levels. Meanwhile, visitation to these lands has increased significantly and continues to climb in this pandemic era. The time has come to invest in the Forest Service ski area program and its recreation program as a whole. We need the SHRED Act because ski areas are less likely to receive timely reviews of projects when forests are not adequately staffed. For example, ski areas have experienced pauses during which proposals are not accepted by the agency for almost a year's time. On some forests, the agency's lack of bandwidth limits them to reviewing one project at a time. Even on those forests with multiple projects, understaffing results in delays, which slow down ski area projects significantly. When timelines are uncertain, ski areas find it harder to invest significant resources. The end result is that ski areas are slow to upgrade critical infrastructure. It also means that ski areas are slower to transition to 4-season operations, which can help provide year-round jobs in mountain communities. To be clear, ski areas pay for all of the improvements that you see at a resort, such as chairlifts, ski lodges, and other facilities. That won't change under the SHRED Act, but what will change is that Forest Service personnel will be in place to administer permits and review proposals for improvements in a timely manner. The benefits of the SHRED Act will extend beyond the Forest Service's ski area program. The legislation will also help improve permit administration for outfitters, guides, and other recreation permittees. Visitors to national forests will experience much better trailhead services such as parking, toilets, trash disposal, and signage. Much needed investments in avalanche forecasting and education will enhance the experience for backcountry users. Finally, the bill will help improve preparedness for fires and support the leasing of federal land for workforce housing and other community needs. Thank you so much for the opportunity to provide this testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Hensroth. The chair now recognizes Mr. Joel Peterson, President and CEO of the Mule Deer Foundation.
Thank you, Chairman Neguse, and good afternoon to you, and as well as Ranking Member Westerman and Ranking Member Fulcher, and all the members of the subcommittee. It's really a pleasure for me to have the opportunity to testify before you today on the MAPLand Act. My name is Joel Peterson, and I am the President and CEO of the Mule Deer Foundation. Founded in 1988, the Mule Deer Foundation is the nation's only conservation organization in North America that's dedicated to the conservation of the mule deer, black-tailed deer, and their habitats. In addition to being a leader in big game migration corridor work and habitat restoration in the West, Mule Deer Foundation is also actively involved in conservation policy and is a strong voice for hunter access. It's in that vein that I'm pleased to be here today to testify in support of the MAPLand Act. This act, as we've heard, has been recently reintroduced in both the House and Senate and enjoys strong bipartisan support. Thanks to Congressman Moore and the diverse original co-sponsors for the introduction of this bill, and I further thank Congressman Fulcher for his continued leadership on this legislation. I think it's worth noting that MAPLand has also been reintroduced in the Senate by Senator Risch and a diverse cross-section of original co-sponsors, including Chairman Manchin and Ranking Member Barrasso of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. As we've heard today, our federal land management agencies, including the Forest Service and BLM, who we heard from earlier, currently lack the resources needed to digitize the records related to the lands they administer. We also heard that across the West, more than 9.5 million acres of federal public lands have no permanent legal means of access. And unfortunately, in many places, our historical access to public lands across private property continues to decline. I believe that part of the problem is that the public simply doesn't know where access exists. And as we've heard, that's because many of these easement records are on paper in local offices and have not been integrated into digital mapping systems. While each of the agencies can point to parts of the legislation that they've completed or are working on, as we've heard, no agency has fulfilled all the aspects. I would recognize the Forest Service on their efforts to compile and share their travel management layers, which has been a great asset for the public to have. However, as we heard, out of the 37,000 recorded easements that they believe they have, there's about 32,000 which have not yet been digitized or uploaded to a database that's accessible by the public. At the same time, digital mapping and GPS technologies have revolutionized the ways in which sportsmen and women navigate public lands. But the incomplete mapping data that we have prevents us from realizing the full benefit of these technologies. I'd ask this group, when was the last time you used a paper map to navigate while you were on vacation or looking for a restaurant in a new town? Today, we all use a smartphone or a GPS instead of a paper map. Put simply, if information isn't digitized, it pretty much does not exist. As we've seen and as we've heard from others today, in the last year, American people are discovering and rediscovering our public lands. And as a result, many of these areas are becoming overcrowded. Making information about our public lands available at our fingertips will better distribute our use across landscapes. It'll reduce user conflicts, and it'll improve the overall recreational experiences. Not only does MAPLand give guidance to the agencies on how they should digitize this data, importantly, it also authorizes $31 million over the next 3 years to help the agencies digitize this information and get it into a format and a location that public land users can easily find the access routes, and determine the allowable activities on millions of acres of federal public lands. I believe this is a relatively small investment that will allow taxpayers to better utilize the lands that they already own. And further, it will yield exponential returns for state and local economies in the areas where people go to recreate. MAPLAND is a legislation that is strongly supported not only by the MDF, but by the nation's top sporting conservation organizations. These organizations include the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, who's provided great leadership on this issue over the past several years, the Boone and Crockett Club, the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, the National Wildlife Federation, and many, many others. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak with you today and testify on this. I look forward, and the community looks forward, to working with the subcommittee on this important bill and working towards its eventual enactment. Thank you again for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for your testimony. I suspect that Ranking Member Fulcher uses those written maps that you referenced when he is traversing the backcountry in Idaho, or at least those areas that he doesn't know by the back of his hand. But I take your point that the rest of us are using digital maps. I want to thank each of the witnesses for their valuable testimony. Remind the members that Committee Rule Sub 3, subparagraph D, imposes a 5-minute limit on questions. The chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses. I will start by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. I want to say again, thank you to each of the witnesses for their testimony. I want to thank Ms. Mapp for her testimony in particular on a cause that's so important and near and dear to my heart, which is expanding recreational opportunities and access to our public lands for the Black community across our country. Ms. Robley, I also want to thank you for coming to testify in support of the SOAR Act and highlighting the great mission of the Mountaineers. I think that your organization and your testimony really perfectly represents the importance of this legislation to commercial outfitters and guides, as well as those that are operating in the not-for-profit space. And I certainly applaud the Mountaineers for the ongoing focus on youth programs that you talked about and prioritizing those from underserved areas. And I wonder if you could, I guess one area that I'm wondering if you could just kind of expound on, you touched on this, but what has been one of your biggest frustrations with the permitting process, right? If you could just identify just one. You offered a couple of examples that I thought really underscored the necessity for this legislation, but I wonder if you might be able to expound on that a little bit and how the SOAR Act would help address that particular concern for you and other users.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Chair Nagus, for the question. While the bureaucratic challenges are a regular frustration for our staff and volunteers trying to navigate complex systems, I think, the biggest frustration is probably just the barriers it presents for accessing the outdoors. In most places on our public lands, the unguided public doesn't have limitations on use, but programs like ours that take people outside safely and responsibly were limited. So, paradoxically, most of the regulation falls on guided users like ours that are taught leave no trace skills. They're led by leaders that have a high level of skill and certification. So simplifying the permitting system would allow groups like the Mountaineers to get more people out on public lands safely and responsibly.
Terrific. Well, I certainly share your enthusiasm for achieving that goal, and that's why I'm so excited about the SOAR Act and about getting it across the finish line this year. Mr. Hensroth, as you mentioned, am co-sponsor of the SHRED Act. I certainly enjoyed visiting with you and many others in Summit County a few weeks ago about this important legislation and how important it would be for my district in particular, being home to White River National Forest, but obviously to all of the 122 National Forest ski area permit holders. But I wonder if you could just, perhaps using a basin as an example, if you could speak to how the bill not only benefits ski areas, but really the neighboring communities and the economy more broadly.
Thank you, Representative Nagus. That is an excellent question. And specifically for Arapahoe Basin, we went through recently a major expansion project. And it was a project that was widely popular in our community. The project was supported by our county commissioners. It was supported by our local sheriff. And it was to create a new area that is now open called the Beavers. But it took us many years to get through that project. And that wasn't because there was a big environmental fight over it. There was just simply a long queue to get in line. And as we worked through the master planning process and subsequently the NEPA process, we waited nearly 2 years just to get to the point of being able to ask the question. So we think this is an excellent bill. Many desks at the Forest Service sit empty because the funding has diminished so much over the years. I think this is an outstanding way for what is, while nationally not really a significant financial number, locally a very significant financial number in dollars to be put to good use for a great local cause. You know, recreation is the backbone of our community. And despite what we've been through with the pandemic, we're still doing really well. Ski visitation was very good under the conditions last year. And I think anything that helps our community, helps the White River National Forest, the most visited forest in the nation, anything that helps us do a better job and take a better care of our forest is a big boost for everyone involved.
Well, I thank you, and I certainly agree with you there. With that, I will yield back the balance of my time, and we will, the chair will now recognize Ranking Member Westerman, if he's with us, for his 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Joel, it's good to see you again, and congratulations on your new role with the Mule Deer Foundation. You stated in your testimony that 9 million acres are inaccessible to federal lands, or they lack permanent access. And you also stated has digitized less than 1/7 of their existing access easement records. But can you give us a greater sense of how this negatively impacts recreational opportunities on our public lands by having this missing mapping information?
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Congressman, and likewise, it's good to see you again. I think the issue really goes beyond the 9.5 million acres we're out there. Those areas, some of them we're not going to be able to get to, but certainly some of those areas, my understanding is Region 1 of the Forest Service is using that information to look for solutions to get to those areas. But to me, the real issue is just the lack of information that's out there that we have at our fingertips. Being new to Utah and trying to learn a new landscape and a large landscape out here in the West, I can attest firsthand to the challenges of being on the Manti LaSalle Forest this last weekend. And without having that digital technology available, would have been a real challenge for me to learn my way around. However, there were many roads that I came to that didn't have a sign at the end of them, that it wasn't clear based upon the information that I had, whether they were open to the public or not. And so erring on the side of caution, I chose not to go down those areas. And I think that a lot of users of our public lands defer in that direction. On the flip side, I think having the information and knowing that you're on a public access easement could help to reduce conflicts by making sure that people aren't driving down a private landowner's driveway and ending up at their house because they can't see the house at the end of the road. So I think that's just a couple of personal examples where firsthand I've seen it and heard that same thing from our members and volunteers.
Yeah, we definitely live in a digital age. I was thinking back, my kids are older now, but when they were young, we would do some geocaching, and it was I don't even know if people do that anymore. Take a handheld GPS unit and go find these geocaches, and that kind of made the experience better for them, I believe, because it integrated some technology in with the outdoor experience. But how important is it as we try to encourage the next generation of sportsmen and women to get outdoors, these new tools and technologies?
Well, I think it's key, and I did enjoy geocaching with my daughters as well, so I can relate to your experiences there. But, I think we're all aware of the affinity that the younger generations have for the digital technology in their phones. And even when I take my daughters out into the forest or fishing, they're on there and they're posting and telling the story while they're out there. But I think it's important that people be able to connect with nature. And if the way they want to find out information about where they can go and what they do is through that digital technology, I think we're losing a real opportunity to get people out there and get them to learn about the things that you and I and others on this hearing today care about if it's hard for them to find that information. And so I can't stress the importance of having this updated information in a timely manner at the fingertips of the people that want to use it.
Thank you. Ms. Mapp, I applaud the work of you and your organization to get more diverse groups to enjoy the great outdoors. It's a commendable goal to try to get all of our population to enjoy more of the outdoors. But can you tell me what are some of the main barriers for access to minority and low-income communities when it comes to recreating on public lands?
Yes, in the early days of Outdoor Afro, and thank you so much for this question, we set out to find out what those barriers were. And near the top of the list was where to go and what to do. People just did not have the information about what was available to them. And so that's why Outdoor Afro has really set out to create a leadership network who we train and who we connect with outfitters and public land agencies to really help spread the word. I feel like, there's so much available and people don't know, and also they don't see themselves inside of those experiences. And this is why digital was so important to us, to really help shift the visual representation of who we imagine gets outside and importantly leads outside.
Thank you. Let's see, and Mr. Chairman, I've not been able to get the timer up on my computer this whole hearing. So how much time do I have left?
You are over by 18 seconds, Ranking Member.
I guess I should yield back to you, Mr. Chairman. I, again, appreciate the witnesses.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the distinguished gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib.
Thank you so much, Chairman Nagoose. We are so incredibly fortunate today, as you all have heard from her already, but we're fortunate to have Rue Mapp, founder of Outdoor Afro, a national nonprofit with networks in 33 states and the District of Columbia, operating in 56 cities across our country. Outdoor Afro supports Black environmental leadership and reconnects Black folks with the outdoors through welcoming, culturally responsive, and nature-based experiences. So I'm really incredibly happy that they are on this panel. So, Ms. Mapp, the Environmental Justice and Recreation Permitting Act is something that many folks, especially in my district, in the 13th district, is very much in support and welcoming. Can you explain how this bill will support priority, making it a priority for many of our Black neighbors to have access to our outdoors?
Yes, I have found that nothing happens, and thank you so much for your generous comments and just the spotlight that you shine on our work. And I have just found from the very beginning of Outdoor Afro and still through today that nothing happens faster than the speed of relationships. And if we can find a way for people to build relationships with our public lands through easier access, as well as to support leadership and partnership in the community that provide a welcoming invitation for people, we can't expect people to be the environmental stewards that this planet needs right now. And so I find that sometimes we have this rush to the altar of conservation before children have a chance to develop a relationship with the outdoors. If I see children outside picking up trash, my first question is, have they ever played in this space? If they're picking up cigarette butts from a beach, have they ever put their toes in that warm sand and smelled that salty air? And so we stand in the place of relationships, as well as helping to foster more role models, because not everybody has a role model in their family who can connect them to the outdoors. And so this is why we have a leadership team of people who live right in the community and who can connect people with ease and greater ease and training to opportunities to connect with outfitters. I take delight in connecting over 60 families to whitewater rafting experiences with an outfitter that depends on permitting. And it's just a powerful connection when we can have members of the community partner with trained outfitters, as well as connecting with public agencies to understand what's available and to remind everybody that these are everyone's lands, and finding those stories of America in those places are a powerful way to help people feel a greater sense of belonging.
And when you say that, why is it important to incorporate, and I know you do this, incorporate Black history and cultural knowledge into nature-based experiences? What myths are you all fighting against?
Well, we have a lot of stereotype out there that Black people don't have a relationship with nature. And in addition to people like my father and so many people in our families, our grandmother's gardens and fishing with that uncle, we've got people in our own history. I think about Harriet Tubman as a wilderness leader. She absolutely understood the land and how to get people moving in the cover of night, ironically without a GPS or digital access to those maps. And that nature knowledge is something that we've lost. And I think it's something that all Americans need to have. And we have so many stories of people's empowered connections and relationships. And I love that we talked about healing in the last panel, because in this last year, it has been even more important for us to bring those stories in and help people to understand the possibility of healing through our connections to nature.
No, thank you so much, Ms. Mapp. I mean, this past year, you'd be surprised. It was the first time this past year, I started going hiking, and it was by accident, right? Because of COVID. And as soon as I'm out there, I'm like, I want to bring all of my babies from the district out here. They have to feel this, see this. I even felt so much better. So when you talk about healing and all those things, but I want them, and it makes me so emotional, but I want them to understand what fresh air feels like, and that they don't deserve living in the shadows of oil refineries and so forth. But I really appreciate and really respect the work that you all are doing. With that, I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gentlewoman yields back. The chair now recognizes Ranking Member Fulcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Congressman Tlaib. That's one of the reasons I love Idaho so much. It was just what you said. I have, first of all, a question for Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson, thank you for your work on the Mule Deer Foundation. Appreciate you very much. And just as you know, one of the conflicts that are out there happen to be through our private landowners and either hunters or outdoorsmen, sportsmen, and the trespassing problem. And of course, some of that is perhaps carelessness, some of it is not. What do you think the impact of this Mapland Act would have on that particular situation?
I think it would be a tremendous benefit in helping to prevent it. With the technologies that we have now, even a smartphone can get down to within 9 feet of where your location is in the field. And so if there's good digitized maps that show those property lines, show what's allowed and what's not in those areas, I think it'll really help to keep hunters, fishermen, other recreationists on the public land where they should be and off the private land where they don't have permission.
Thank you for that. Moving on to Ms. Mapp. Thank you for your work as well. It was great to hear your background too, and just that ranching background just really does set the premise for a good understanding of our outdoors. But there are many restrictions on our wilderness areas, as you know. One of those restrictions has to do with group size limitations that are oftentimes barriers to that access. Do you think that it would be helpful to increase those group size limitations on wilderness areas? And just what are your thoughts on that?
Thank you for your question. I think that location matters. And it matters to me if there's significant impact in those areas where limiting the size would help us not love certain areas to death. And so I think it really has to do with context, and also from a risk management perspective. We're very mindful that we're bringing out groups of people who we can responsibly hold risk management practices with integrity, as well as to have a genuinely much more connected experience. And so I'm very thoughtful about the number of people given the context of where we might be, as well as helping us to have a safer experience and the most connected experience. And so we have outdoor Afro experiences sometimes with as little as 5 people. Sometimes it's 20 people and more. And that may or may not make sense if you're in a local area with lots of impact. And so we train our leaders to work with our park agencies to understand capacities and the right context for the activities and the locations.
Okay, Ms. Mapp, we live in a state where we've got millions of acres of public land, and certainly in our area, it would help to increase that. Mr. Chairman, I think I've got a little over a minute left. I'd be willing to yield that to Ranking Member Westerman if he would like it.
Mr. Westerman? It seems we may
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
All right, the gentleman yields back. The chair will now recognize Mr. Obernolte, or I'm sorry, Mr. Moore, if Mr. Moore is here. And my apologies, I think we missed Mr. Moore on the last panel. So we didn't hear him. Okay, why don't we give an opportunity for Mr. Obernolte, if he's still with us. All right, one more opportunity here for Mr. Moore. I believe he is no longer with us, and so I would like to say to the witnesses, first, thank you for your valuable testimony. As you can imagine, we had multiple committee hearings happening simultaneously today, so members have numerous commitments, but I hope that each of you know that we very much appreciated your testimony, and as you probably gleaned from many of the questions, that we very much appreciated each of you taking the time to testify in front of our committee, and I want to thank the members who did participate for their questions, and also for the benefit of the witnesses, the members of the committee, I suspect, will have some additional questions for some of you, or perhaps all of you, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing under Committee Rule 3, Subparagraph O. Members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be open for 10 business days for these responses. And so, if there is no further business, and without further objection, the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you all again.
Thank you.